Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. This is perhaps the greatest discovery of all time, that man can alter his life by altering his attitudes of mind. These words, etched into the annals of human achievement, may seem simple at first glance, yet within them lies the power to transform darkness into light, poverty into abundance, and despair into triumph. I, Napoleon Hill, dedicated my life to studying the invisible forces that shape human destiny, and I can assure you that no principle stands more firmly at the cornerstone of success than this. Let me tell you about Michael Thornton. At 37, Michael's life was a monument to unfulfilled potential. Each morning, he would awaken in his cramped apartment to the sound of a leaking faucet, drip, 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 a constant reminder of the many things he couldn't afford to fix. The ceiling above his bed bore a yellowish water stain that, if you looked at it long enough, resembled the map of an island, perhaps the island of dreams he had long abandoned. The alarm clock would blare at 5:30 a.m., and Michael's hand would instinctively reach out to silence it, his fingers feeling the rough texture of the nightstand's chipped veneer. The brief moment between sleep and wakefulness was his only respite, the only time when the weight of his circumstances didn't press down upon his chest like an invisible anvil. Shuffling to the bathroom, Michael would avoid his own reflection in the mirror. The lines etched around his eyes told a story of dwindling hope. His bathroom cabinet contained exactly 3 items: a toothbrush with frayed bristles, a half-empty tube of toothpaste squeezed to within an inch of its life, and a bottle of generic pain relievers, his constant companion in dealing with the migraine headaches brought on by stress. As he prepared his meager breakfast, instant coffee and toast that was slightly stale, Michael would glance at the pile of bills on his kitchen counter. The red final notice stamps seemed to pulse with urgency. $4,273 in credit card debt, $80.63 in overdue utilities, $11,452 remaining on a student loan for a degree he never completed. The numbers danced before his eyes, mocking him. The walls of his apartment were bare, except for a single framed photograph of his parents. They had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving him with nothing but memories and the crushing weight of medical bills that had consumed their modest savings. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, Michael would speak to their image, apologizing for becoming a man they wouldn't recognize. His job at Meridian Shipping and Logistics offered little solace. For 12 years, Michael had occupied the same grey cubicle, processing the same forms, answering the same customer complaints. The fluorescent lights above buzzed incessantly, casting a sickly glow that seemed to drain the color from everything, including Michael himself. His supervisor, a man 20 years his junior with an MBA and a dazzling smile, had passed him over for promotion 3 times in the past year. "You lack initiative, Thornton," he had said during their last performance review, not looking up from Michael's personnel file. "You're reliable, but that's not enough anymore. We need innovators, risk-takers." The irony wasn't lost on Michael. Once he had been full of ideas, ambitions, and dreams. He had sketched business plans on napkins, stayed up late reading books about entrepreneurship, and spoken passionately to anyone who would listen about his vision for the future. But somewhere along the way, between the disappointments, the setbacks, and the gradual erosion of his self-confidence, that version of Michael had disappeared. His colleagues barely acknowledged him now. In the break room, conversations would halt awkwardly when he entered, then resume once he had filled his chipped mug with the bitter, burnt coffee that had been sitting on the warmer since morning. He had become invisible, a ghost moving through the motions of a life unlived. Evenings offered no comfort. Michael would return to his empty apartment, microwave a frozen dinner, and sink into his warm sofa. The television provided background noise as he stared blankly at the wall, occasionally glancing at his phone hoping for a message, a call, any confirmation that he still existed in someone else's world. But the screen remained dark, save for notifications from his bank about low account balances. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and filled with dreams of falling through empty space with nothing to grasp, no bottom in sight. He would often awaken in a cold sweat, sheets twisted around his legs, heart pounding against his ribs like a prisoner demanding release. Weekends stretched before him like deserts. He would walk through the park near his apartment, watching families picnic on the grass, couples holding hands, children laughing as they chased each other in spirals of joy. Michael would find a bench in the shade and sit alone, a spectator to happiness that seemed as unreachable as the stars. His health had begun to deteriorate. The constant knot in his stomach had led to digestive issues. His shoulders remained perpetually hunched, creating a persistent ache in his upper back. The headaches were getting worse, and sometimes his vision would blur, the world around him dissolving into indistinct shapes and colors. It was on one such day, a Tuesday that felt indistinguishable from any other Tuesday in the grey tapestry of his existence, that Michael's life changed. He had stopped at a small coffee shop on his way to work, breaking his usual routine due to a water main break that had forced him to take a different route. The shop was warm and filled with the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans. Classical music played softly in the background. Michael ordered the cheapest item on the menu and took a seat in the corner, waiting for his name to be called. Next to him, someone had left behind a book. Its cover was worn, its pages dog-eared from frequent reading. Almost without thinking, Michael picked it up and read the title, Think and Grow Rich. He flipped it open to a random page and found himself staring at words that seemed to leap from the paper directly into his consciousness. The starting point of all achievement is desire. Keep this constantly in mind. Weak desire brings weak results, just as a small fire makes a small amount of heat. Something stirred within Michael, a forgotten ember of possibility. He read the passage again, then turned the page, hungry for more. When his name was called for his coffee, he barely heard it. When his phone buzzed with a message from his supervisor asking about his whereabouts, he didn't notice. For the first time in years, Michael felt fully present, fully alive. The words on those pages spoke to him with an urgency he couldn't ignore. They described principles of achievement that were both simple and profound. They suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, the prison of his circumstances was one largely of his own making, and that the key to its door had been within his grasp all along. As the morning light streamed through the windows of the coffee shop, illuminating specks of dust that danced in the air like tiny constellations, Michael Thornton experienced an awakening. It wasn't dramatic or accompanied by angelic choirs. It was quiet, internal, a shift in perspective so subtle, yet so fundamental that it would alter the course of his existence. He didn't know it yet, but this chance encounter with forgotten wisdom would become the first step on a journey that would transform not only his financial situation, but his entire understanding of what it means to be alive, to have purpose, to create value in the world. And it all began with a single powerful realization. The circumstances of his life were not the result of bad luck or fate or the actions of others. They were, in large part, the direct manifestation of his thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes, all of which were within his power to change. For Michael Thornton, standing at the threshold between a life of quiet desperation and one of unlimited possibility, the most important journey was about to begin, the journey from within. The morning after his discovery, Michael woke before his alarm. For the first time in years, there was a sense of anticipation rather than dread. He'd purchased the copy of Think and Grow Rich from the coffee shop owner, who had smiled knowingly. "That book found you," she'd said. "It has a way of doing that." Michael sat at his small kitchen table, a notebook open beside him. He wrote at the top of the page, "Definite major purpose." The phrase had leapt from the book's pages. He stared at the blank space below it, pen hovering uncertainly. "What do I truly want?" he whispered to the empty apartment. After an hour of deep reflection, he wrote, "To create a logistics consultation business that helps small companies compete with larger corporations by optimizing their supply chains." It was the dream he'd abandoned years ago, deemed too risky, too ambitious. Later that morning, in his cubicle at Meridian, Michael opened a new document on his computer. His fingers moved with purpose as he outlined a simple plan. Read one chapter of the book each night, apply one principle each day, document results, adjust approach as needed. Small daily improvements eventually result in stunning achievements, he murmured, recalling a quote from Robin Sharma he'd once admired. That evening, Michael cleared a space in his living room and created what Napoleon Hill called a definite purpose station. A small desk dedicated solely to working on his dream. He couldn't afford much, but he placed a plant beside his laptop, a touch of life amidst the stagnation. "Mr. Thornton," his supervisor's voice cut through his concentration the following day. "These reports show unusual attention to detail. You've identified efficiency gaps I've never noticed." Michael nodded. "I've been thinking differently about our systems." "Well, keep it up." The supervisor seemed genuinely surprised. During lunch, Michael approached Ileana from accounting. a woman he'd barely spoken to despite years of passing in hallways. "I'm conducting research on supply chain optimization," he said, surprised by his own boldness. "Would you be willing to share your perspective over coffee sometime?" Ileana raised an eyebrow. "The Michael Thornton no doesn't initiate conversations." "I'm not that Michael anymore," he replied with a tentative smile. 2 weeks later, Michael faced his first significant setback. He'd submitted a proposal to management outlining cost-saving measures in their shipping department. The response came swift and dismissive. "These suggestions fall outside your job description. Please focus on your assigned duties." That night, doubt crept in like an old friend. He sat at his definite purpose station, staring at the rejection email. "Maybe they're right," he whispered. "Who am I to suggest changes? I'm just me." His phone rang. Startling him, it was Ileana. "I heard about your proposal," she said. "They shot it down because it would eliminate the VP's brother-in-law's position." Oh, the weight of politics and nepotism felt crushing. "But it was brilliant," she continued. "I've worked for 3 Fortune 500 companies, and your analysis was spot on. Have you considered looking beyond Meridian?" After hanging up, Michael returned to his notebook. Below his definite major purpose, he wrote, "Obstacle der 1, resistance to change from others." Then, after consideration, solution, find environments receptive to new ideas. The following Sunday, Michael met with Carlos, owner of a struggling local grocery delivery service. They sat in a small cafe, papers spread between them. "I can't afford a professional consultant," Carlos admitted. "I'm not asking for payment," Michael replied. "I'm building experience. Let me analyze your operations for 2 weeks. If my suggestions help, write me a testimonial. If not, no harm done." Carlos studied him suspiciously. "Why would you do this for free?" Michael thought of a quote from his reading. As Aristotle once said, "Where your talents and the needs of the world cross, there lies your vocation." "I believe this is where I can create value." 4 weeks later, Carlos's delivery times had decreased by 32%, and fuel costs had dropped by 7%. "Whatever you're doing," Carlos said, handing Michael an envelope containing a glowing testimonial, "it's working." By the 3rd month of his transformation, Michael had helped 3 small businesses optimize their operations. Each success built his confidence and refined his methods. He created a simple website showcasing his results and began a blog sharing insights on logistics optimization. Yet at Meridian, his situation deteriorated. His supervisor grew increasingly resentful of Michael's new attitude and assigned him the most tedious tasks. Colleagues who had previously ignored him now watched him with curious eyes, sensing the change but unable to define it. One evening, returning home exhausted from a particularly challenging day, Michael found his apartment door ajar. Inside, everything of value had been stolen: his laptop, the small television, even the framed photo of his parents. He sat on the floor surrounded by disorder and felt tears threatening. This was the universe testing him, he thought, pushing back against his progress. When faced with adversity, remember this truth, he recalled from his reading of James Allen's As a Man Thinketh. Circumstances don't make the man, they only reveal him to himself. Instead of collapsing, Michael pulled out his phone and called Ileana. "I need help," he said simply. She arrived 30 minutes later with her own laptop. "Let's retrieve your website from the cloud and get back to work," she said, setting up at his definite purpose station. "The thief took your computer, not your mind." Working together late into the night, they not only restored his files but improved his website's design. As morning approached, Ileana studied him with new respect. "You know what's different about you now?" she asked. "What?" "You no longer wear that invisible sign that says I've given up. It's like you're fully present in your own life." The following week brought Michael's moment of truth. His supervisor called him into a private meeting. "Your performance reviews are contradictory," he began stiffly. "Your basic duties have suffered, yet you've shown initiative in unauthorized areas. We're prepared to offer you a choice. Recommit fully to your position here or accept a severance package." Michael felt his heart pounding. The security of his paycheck, meager as it was, stood against the uncertainty of his emerging dream. That evening, he met with his growing circle of supporters at Ileana's apartment. Carlos, Dana, owner of a small manufacturing company he'd helped, and surprisingly the coffee shop owner who'd sold him the book, whose name he'd learned was Margaret. "I can't believe I'm considering leaving a steady job in this economy," Michael confessed. "Let me share something," Margaret said quietly. "Before owning the coffee shop, I was a corporate executive for 20 years. One day, my mentor asked me a question that changed everything. Are you willing to spend the best hours of your days building someone else's dream at the expense of your own?" The room fell silent. "That's from Seth Godin, isn't it?" Dana asked. Margaret nodded. "His wisdom helped me make my choice. Now you face yours." Carlos leaned forward. "Michael, in 3 months you've shown me possibilities I couldn't see in 3 years of struggling. Imagine what you could do with full focus on your vision." "But the financial risk," Michael began. "Is real," Ileana interrupted. "So is the risk of looking back at 80 years old, wondering what might have been." She slid a folder across the table. "I've analyzed your finances. With your current savings and minimal consulting income, you have a 3-month runway. It's tight, but possible." Michael opened the folder, studying the careful projections. "There's something else," Dana said. "I've spoken with 2 other business owners. They're willing to become your first paying clients if you commit full-time." The conversation continued late into the night, weighing possibilities, risks, and potential rewards. Michael listened, asked questions, but ultimately knew the decision was his alone. The next morning, standing before his supervisor's desk, Michael felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. "I've made my decision," he said. "And?" The supervisor didn't look up from his computer. "I'm choosing my own path. I accept the severance." For a brief moment, the supervisor's facade cracked. "You're making a mistake, Thornton. The economy's uncertain. Your little side projects aren't a career." Michael smiled. "Thank you for your concern. But as Henry David Thoreau wisely observed, the price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it. I've been paying too high a price for too long." That evening in his apartment, which now felt like a chrysalis rather than a prison, Michael sat at his definite purpose station. The plant beside his borrowed laptop had grown new leaves. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote at the top, Phase 2, Building the Vision. His phone chimed with a text from Ileana. "Nervous yet?" he typed back. "Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure." Her response came quickly. "Perfect. That means you're finally alive." Michael looked around his small apartment. Still modest, still bearing signs of his financial struggles, but somehow transformed by the new energy he brought to it. The water stain on the ceiling no longer resembled an island of abandoned dreams, but rather a map to unexplored territory. He recalled one final piece of wisdom from his recent readings, this time from the modern thought leader Brené Brown. "Vulnerability is not weakness, it's our greatest measure of courage." Michael Thornton was nothing if not vulnerable now, exposed to risk, uncertainty, and possibility in equal measure. Yet as he closed his notebook and prepared for bed, he realized that for the first time in years, he was looking forward to tomorrow not with dread, but with anticipation. The man who would awaken in this apartment the next morning would be both familiar and strange to him, still bearing the scars of past defeats, yet newly fortified with purpose, direction, and the most powerful force Napoleon Hill had identified, a burning desire translated into definite action. 5 years had passed since Michael Thornton had made the decision that changed everything. Thornton Logistics Consulting now occupied the entire 12th floor of a downtown office building, a far cry from his definite purpose station in that small apartment. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, Michael could see the city sprawling before him, pulsing with possibility. "Your 2 o'clock is here," his assistant announced through the intercom. "Send them in, please," Michael replied, straightening his tie as he stood. The door opened to reveal Carlos, now the owner of a regional grocery delivery service with 15 locations across 3 states. "The empire builder himself," Carlos exclaimed, embracing Michael warmly. "I just signed the acquisition papers this morning. A national chain is buying us out for $17 million. Can you believe it? From nearly bankrupt to this in 5 years." Michael smiled, genuinely happy for his friend, the first client who had believed in him when he had little more than conviction and borrowed wisdom. "Congratulations, Carlos. You did the work." "But you showed me the way," Carlos insisted, placing a bottle of champagne on the desk. "You and your crazy theories about definite major purpose and mastermind alliances." Michael laughed. "Not my theories. I just applied wisdom that's been around for generations." After Carlos left, Michael walked through the open office space where 35 employees, each hired from neighborhoods similar to where he had grown up, worked diligently to help small businesses thrive. The company's mission statement, emblazoned on the wall in bold letters, read, "Transforming business operations, empowering entrepreneurial dreams." That evening, Michael hosted the monthly community business workshop in the company's conference room. What had begun as informal gatherings around Ileana's dining table had evolved into a structured program that had helped launch over 200 local businesses. "The principle is simple," Michael explained to the attentive crowd. "As Jim Rohn taught us, success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines practiced every day. The question is not whether these principles work, they demonstrably do, but whether you will apply them consistently, especially when results aren't immediately visible." Later, as the event wound down, Michael checked his phone to find a voicemail from Margaret, the coffee shop owner who had first guided him to Think and Grow Rich. "Michael, it's Margaret. I need to speak with you urgently. The building owner has tripled my rent. I have 30 days to vacate or come up with the money. After 12 years, it looks like this is the end of Chapter's Coffee. Call me when you can." Michael felt a pang in his chest. Chapter's Coffee wasn't just a business. It was a community institution, safe harbor for dreamers, a place where ideas were born and nurtured. It was where his own transformation had begun. The following morning, Michael met with his executive team, including Ileana, who had become his chief financial officer and trusted advisor. "We've been approached by Meridian Shipping," she announced, sliding a prospectus across the table. "They want to acquire us for $28 million. A murmur rippled through the room. Meridian, the very company that had once dismissed Michael's ideas, now wanted to buy his vision. "They're struggling to compete with more agile companies," Ileana continued. "Our methodologies and client relationships are exactly what they need." Michael studied the document, noting the name of his former supervisor, now Meridian's CEO. "And what happens to our team?" "Our community programs." Ileana hesitated. "According to these terms, they would absorb our profitable divisions and reevaluate the rest?" That afternoon, Michael walked to Chapter's Coffee. The familiar bell chimed as he entered, the smell of freshly ground beans enveloping him like an old friend. Margaret looked up from behind the counter, her face brightening. "Michael, I didn't expect you to come in person." They sat at the same corner table where he had first discovered the book that changed his life. Margaret outlined her situation, the rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, the developers' plans for luxury condominiums, the impossible new rent. "I've looked at other locations," she sighed, "but the numbers don't work. Maybe it's time to close this chapter, so to speak." Michael gazed around the space, watching students bent over laptops, entrepreneurs sketching ideas on napkins, friends engaged in deep conversation. The walls were lined with books, philosophical works, business volumes, poetry collections, all free for customers to read. "What if you didn't have to move or close?" he asked slowly. "Unless you know a way to convince a developer that a coffee shop is more valuable than luxury housing, I don't see an alternative." Michael returned to his office with a plan forming. For 3 days he barely left the building, working late into the night with his team, running numbers, exploring scenarios, making calls to contacts throughout the city. On the 4th day, his former supervisor, now Meridian's CEO, sat across from him, impatient. "We need an answer on our offer, Thornton. $28 million is more than generous for a company your size." Michael slid a counter-proposal across the desk. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in selling." "Then why am I here?" "Because I'm proposing a partnership instead," Michael replied. "Your infrastructure combined with our methodologies could revolutionize the industry, but our community programs remain independent and fully funded." The CEO scoffed. "That's not how acquisitions work. We determine what stays and what goes." "Then we don't have a deal," Michael said calmly. "But before you leave, I'd like you to see something." He led the CEO to the conference room where a presentation awaited, detailing how Meridian's profits could increase by 40% within 18 months through strategic implementation of Thornton's systems without sacrificing a single job. "This is impressive," the CEO admitted reluctantly. "But your community programs are still a drain on resources. The board won't approve." Michael leaned forward. "What if they weren't a drain? What if they were your greatest asset?" 2 weeks later, Michael stood before a crowd gathered in Chapter's Coffee, which had been expanded to include the adjacent storefronts. A new sign hung above the entrance: Chapters, Coffee, Community, Creation. "Today marks the beginning of something extraordinary," Michael announced. "Through our new partnership with Meridian Shipping, we're launching the Community Business Incubator, a place where anyone with determination and a definite purpose can access resources, mentorship, and funding to build their dreams." The crowd erupted in applause as Margaret unveiled a plaque dedicating the space to those who dare to think differently and persist when others surrender. Michael hadn't sold his company after all. Instead, he had leveraged Meridian's need for innovation to create something neither organization could have built alone: a corporate partnership that fueled community transformation. The celebration continued into the evening. As the crowd thinned, Michael noticed a young man sitting alone in the corner, hunched over a notebook, seemingly oblivious to the festivities. Something about the young man's demeanor, the tense shoulders, the furrowed brow, the aura of quiet desperation, struck a chord of recognition in Michael. He approached carefully, coffee cups in hand. "Mind if I join you?" Michael asked. The young man looked up, startled. You're Michael Thornton." Michael smiled, sliding a cup toward him. "And you are?" "Jason Williams. I've been attending your workshops for the past month, but I haven't had the courage to speak up." "And what are you working on so intently tonight?" Michael gestured toward the notebook. Jason hesitated before turning it around. The page was titled Definite Major Purposes, with several crossed-out attempts beneath it. "I can't seem to get it right," Jason admitted. "I know what I don't want: to keep living paycheck to paycheck, feeling invisible, wasting my potential. But defining what I do want feels impossible." Michael studied the young man, seeing his former self reflected in those uncertain eyes. "May I?" Michael reached for the pen. At Jason's nod, he wrote at the bottom of the page, "The clarity of your purpose is directly proportional to your willingness to confront your deepest fears." "I don't understand," Jason said. "What terrifies you most?" "Not the surface fears, the deeper ones." Jason thought for a moment. "That I'll let down the people who believe in me, that I'll aim too high and fail publicly. And if those fears weren't holding you back, what would you create?" Something shifted in Jason's expression, a flicker of recognition, as if encountering a part of himself long suppressed. "I would create educational technology that makes advanced learning accessible to kids in neighborhoods like mine," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Programs that adapt to different learning styles and cultural contexts." Michael nodded. "That's not a job or a business idea. That's a purpose worth dedicating your life to. But I don't have the resources or connections or—" "Neither did I," Michael interrupted gently. "What I did have was what you have right now, a definite purpose and the willingness to take one small action each day toward its achievement." They talked until the cafe closed, Michael sharing not just strategies and principles, but the struggles, doubts, and failures that had shaped his journey. As they prepared to leave, Jason asked the question Michael had been expecting. "Why are you spending so much time with me? You must have more important demands on your schedule." Michael placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Because Confucius was right when he said, "If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea." Tonight, I saw that longing in your eyes. 6 months later, Jason's educational technology prototype, developed through the Community Business Incubator, won a National Innovation Award. The cameras flashed as he stepped to the podium. "This recognition belongs to many people," Jason began, "but especially to those who taught me the most fundamental truth of achievement, that our circumstances are not our destiny. They are merely the starting point from which we begin to exercise our power of choice." In the audience, Michael watched with quiet satisfaction, remembering his own journey from invisibility to impact. The ripple effects of transformation were everywhere around him, in the businesses he'd helped build, the jobs created, the communities strengthened, and most powerfully, in the light of purpose that now shone in the eyes of people like Jason. "The greatest discovery in human history," Michael whispered to himself, echoing the words that had changed his life, "is that we become what we think about most of the time." As Jason concluded his speech, he locked eyes with Michael and added words that had not been rehearsed. "If you're watching this and feeling trapped by circumstances, remember that someone once sat where you sit now. They chose to think differently, act differently, and persist differently. Their transformation began with a single decision, the decision to claim the power of their own mind. "What will your decision be?" Jason asked, his voice carrying through the hall. "Because that decision, made now and renewed daily, will determine everything you will ever become and everything you will ever achieve. The time to begin is now," he concluded. "Not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, but now, in this moment, because this moment contains the seed of all future moments. Plant it wisely, nurture it daily, and watch as it grows into a life of extraordinary meaning and achievement." In the standing ovation that followed, a movement was born, a movement of men and women committed to living from purpose rather than circumstance, from vision rather than limitation, from wisdom rather than fear. And it had all begun with a single book, discovered in an unlikely place by a man who had dared to think differently.